Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everybody had a happy Easter. I know it was the strangest Easter that I think any of us have experienced probably in our lifetime. So hopefully everybody's doing well and had a not only happy and productive Easter, but is safe and healthy, staying healthy. Our hearts and prayers definitely go out to all the people affected by not only COVID-19, but the tornadoes that kind of went through the southeast of the United States yesterday and last night. So I know some of the people I know were negatively affected by those. So hopefully everybody's again safe and hanging in there. What we want to do this morning is pick up where we left off with interviewing Dr. Wallach, my father. We're going to talk a lot about selenium today. Not only has that been a huge part of my father's research history and background, but I've grown up around all of that, and it's been a big part of Youngevity's history, including not only my father's research, but Dr. Schrauzer's research, Dr. Milan's research, Dr. Devois' research, Dr. Flores' research, but also the health claim petitions that Dr. Wallach and Youngevity have filed with the FDA at various times. A lot of that has centered around selenium. And so you'll see that selenium is a big part of not only Youngevity's history, my father's history, but our product line. And that really centers around our true belief in the benefits of not only trace minerals and the 90 essential nutrients, but certainly selenium is a big part of that. So with that, we talked about the cystic fibrosis discovery and Yerkes and all of that, I think last time. I know I've got a blog post coming out probably around the 1st of May that delves deeply into that as well. One of the things that we're going to talk about today is, like I said, selenium, but the health report that we filed, among others, with our initial health claim petition to the FDA was compiled by Dr. Philip Wanger of the Department of Environmental and Molecular Toxicology of Oregon State University. My father's naturopathic degree and teaching career intersected with the National College of Naturopathic Medicine in Portland, Oregon, which is what took us, my father and our family, myself included, to Portland, Oregon, which is where Michelle and Johnny Taylor grew up, and I met and married Michelle and all of that. So I have a lot of history with Oregon. But my college career was at Portland State University, which intersected with Oregon Health Sciences University. So a lot of history there. So we're going to make that report available to you. Michelle will post a link to that. It's been posted on the wallachfiles.com, and I think that's where the link will take you, and you can read through that and reference that. The references you'll notice in the back of this selenium report, which was submitted to the FDA, like I said, as part of our health claim petition process, which helped convince the FDA to authorize the initial health claims around selenium. You'll see in the references, I think there's 2 references to Dr. Gerhard Schrauzer, who was the world's foremost expert on selenium, the world's foremost published scientist and researcher in regards to selenium, a mentor of my father, Dr. Wallach's, the head of our scientific advisory board for like 18 years, I think. Youngevity, very accomplished, obviously the founder of the Trace Element Journal and the Trace Element Institute. But you also notice a reference to Klaus Schwartz, or K. Schwartz. And you'll, those of you that know or have viewed the documentary on Dr. Wallach or know of the Klaus Schwartz Award, that is the Klaus Schwartz that award was created after and fashioned after. And again, Dr. Wallach is one of the rare recipients of the Klaus Schwartz Award. And you won't see Dr. Wallach as a reference in this particular report. And the reason being is that this report and the health claim petition centered around selenium and its risk reduction aspects for cancer. And so my father's published research has to do with selenium and other areas. However, you'll see a lot of great reference material in this report. So again, Michelle will make that available, the link to it. You can, it's, I don't know, a 20-page report or something. We submitted thousands of pages of research to the FDA with the health claim petitions around selenium. So anyway, with that, let's dive into it, Dr. Wallach, and let's kind of pick up where we left off. And some of the unique characteristics of selenium, the history of selenium. For in the late 1800s, early 1900s, selenium was thought to be just a nuisance element and unnecessary and even toxic. Water can be toxic, oxygen can be toxic. At certain levels, selenium is no different in that it has benefit if you're in that sweet spot of nutrient intake. And so let's talk about that a little bit, of how that whole history came to be and how that affected your research. We talked about how you knew that it was beneficial to agriculture and injectable for cattle and things like that on the last one of these. I think it was last Monday, so about a week ago. So you can kind of pick up from there and talk about some of the unique aspects of selenium and how just your research came to be around all of that, I guess. I know that was a long-winded question, so dive in wherever you want.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for all the good things that you and Michelle do and continue to do. Appreciate that, and Milan and I both appreciate that. And of course, when you raise cattle, selenium is a big part of your life, because any farmer can go to a feed store and buy injectable selenium and selenium and alfalfa pellets and things, because it was a devastating disease. Selenium doesn't occur uniformly all over the earth. It occurs in veins like gold and silver and stuff like that. And there's areas where there's a lot of it, and there's areas where there's very little, and areas where there's none. And so when calves are born with a selenium deficiency, they will have what's called white muscle disease, which is in human beings called muscular dystrophy. Okay, same thing. Also, they would die from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy of heart disease, white muscle disease, or muscular dystrophy of the heart muscle. And so again, any farmer could go to a feed store and buy the injectable. They had a calf that was born weak and couldn't get up. You just inject them with that selenium, and a half hour later, they're popped up. They're perfectly normal, and so forth. And so I grew up knowing about selenium. And to make a long story short and kind of dive in the middle where we left off, when I finished with the $25 million grant that Marlin Perkins and I had gotten from the National Institutes of Health to do that big study with the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems, Washington University, St. Louis. And basically my job was to do autopsies. It was a postdoctoral fellowship in pathology. I was supposed to do autopsies of animals that died in the St. Louis Zoo and other big zoos around the United States, looking for pollution as a contributor to or the cause of death in animals in the zoos. And then also do autopsies on people who died within a 10-mile radius of these big zoos, and kind of make a connection so that we could use the zoo animals as a canary in the mine situation. In other words, old coal miners used to take canaries in the mine. If poison gases would leak into the mine, the canaries would die, and they knew to get out. And so we felt that if we could find and identify species of animals in zoos that were sensitive to the same pollutants that humans were, if they died, we knew to evacuate the city, kind of thing. That was the whole idea of the study. Make a long story short, after 10 years, came back from Africa on the White Rhino Conservation Project at the invitation of Marlin Perkins, and there was a pathologist on the project. And he chose me because I had run into the first mass die-off in America from pollution in 1961. I was only 21 years old and a graduate student in pathology. Make a long story short, identified what happened, well, why they had this mass die-off. And to make a long story short, it was a combination of weather, temperature, chronic low-grade contamination of pollutants in the drinking water and so forth, and got it all published. And I was only 21 years old. My first scientific publication, gave a copy to many people, including Perkins, and he used that as the basis to get the $25 million grant. What I found was in these 10 years and 20,000 autopsies, 17,000 some change of over 454 species of animals and 3,000 humans, there were no deaths from pollution, either in the zoo animals or the people. So that kind of freaked everybody out. And also we found that all the deaths from zoo animals and people living around the zoo that weren't from viruses and poisons and prescriptions and complications of surgery. 98% of the deaths were caused by simple nutritional deficiencies. And this was the basis of my thesis, and it was published. It's in the Smithsonian Institute as a national treasure because they found those things. And it's very, very exciting. Well, after the 10 years was up and the study was over, I got a job at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, as a pathologist at the Grady Memorial Hospital, which is the teaching hospital for the medical school, and also as a pathologist for NASA, the National Aeronautic Space Administration, at the Primate Center, okay, the Yerkes Primate Center, Atlanta, and got there in 1977. I started my project in 1967, so it was a 10-year project. And at any rate, 1977, I ran into the first non-human case of cystic fibrosis in a monkey in the NASA colony, and got it all written up, and I was so excited. And of course, I was in every newspaper in the world every day for 3 years or 3 months, I guess it was 3 months. And then they fired me because I said that it wasn't a genetic disease like everybody thought. And I said, well, why don't I say purposely because I knew it'd be controversial. So I want you to redo all the blood tests, redo all the microscopic slides of the tissues and so forth, and do all the chemistries and come up with your own conclusion. Nope, you got to be really out of your mind. So they fired me. And of course, I was in the newspaper every day for 3 months again, but this time as a nut, so saying that a genetic disease was not a genetic disease. And I got an invitation to speak in Arizona, went and spoke there to one of these health fairs, and I never heard of such a thing before because I was always in university academics. And I ran into Jim Sensenig, and he said, hey, I want you to come be a speaker at the Naturopathic Physicians Conference in Portland, Oregon. I said, what's a naturopathic physician? I've never heard of one. And he told me, of course, and I went and spoke, and they said, well, look, would you be interested in teaching nutrition and biochemistry and pathology at the school? I go, well, yeah, because I didn't have a job. I had 4 kids. My wife had just died, and so forth. So it was a big mess. And so I said, can I take courses and become a naturopathic physician? Well, they gave me credit for a lot of my courses for my various degrees and things at accredited universities, University of Missouri, Iowa State University, and so forth. So it just took me a year to get my naturopathic degree at that time. And it was very, very exciting, and began to use everything I'd learned on my human patients. And so to make a long story short, again, came up with programs which included selenium for cystic fibrosis, and people would come to me with their children with cystic fibrosis. And selenium deficiency causes the pancreatic and liver disease in kids with cystic fibrosis. The lung disease is caused by deficiency of another nutrient. And so you have to have both deficiencies to get the exact disease called cystic fibrosis. And you give those nutrients, which are 2 of the 90. So I always gave 90 and extra of those 2. And it became quite a thing. And then I was sending stuff again to famous people, and I sent some things to Jerry Lewis. He says, well, what about muscular dystrophy? Well, again, I ran into muscular dystrophy patients and was able to reverse muscular dystrophy in patients. Wait a minute, it's supposed to be a genetic disease in kids. No, there's another nutritional deficiency. Both cystic fibrosis and muscular dystrophy, white muscle disease in calves, had to do with selenium deficiency. So I put together this program for muscular dystrophy, gave it to Jerry Lewis. We were able to reverse muscular dystrophy in dozens of kids. And some of them, one of them was 31 years old, had it from the time he was born. And in just months, we were able to relieve and reverse, completely eliminate his muscular dystrophy, gave it to Jerry Lewis. He got so excited. He took these case reports to the Muscular Dystrophy Foundation. They fired Jerry Lewis and stopped the telethon. And that's why you haven't heard anything about the muscular dystrophy for the last 10 years, or cystic fibrosis for the last 10 years, because we've eliminated them by putting these nutrients, including selenium, into baby foods and baby formulas by federal court action. Now here comes the cherry on the parfait, okay? April 16, 2013, a federal court again awarded us another win where they forced the manufacturers of baby formulas to put the selenium into baby formula. It wasn't in baby formula. It was absolutely not in baby formula. There's only 3 nutrients, 3 minerals in baby formulas since the Second World War when they came up with them. And in 1990, Dr. Milan and I published in one of Dr. Schrauzer's journals, Trace Element Research, okay, the journal Trace Element Research, 1,700 autopsies on kids in Qishan province, China, under the age of 10. They all had died of Qishan disease, which was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease. It's a type of white muscle disease, muscular dystrophy of the heart muscle, causing sudden heart death in kids. This is the sudden heart death you see in athletes in America. We have 25,000 kids under the age of 20 drop dead each year from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, sudden heart death, playing sports or practicing for sports or eating dinner after a day's worth of practice at sports and things, all caused by deficiency of selenium. Well, April 16, 2013, a federal court gave us another win by forcing the manufacturers of baby formula, by forcing them, absolutely a government requirement to have selenium in these baby formulas. Now, this is 2013. They had still not put selenium, a known essential nutrient, in the baby formulas. Well, it turns out when Milan and I published that story on Qishan disease, 1,700, 1,700 cases, we had permission to do 2,000 autopsies. We only had time to do 1,700. And did all the chemistries and the microscopy and got it all published and everything in 3 languages, Mandarin, Cantonese, and English in the Journal of Trace Element Research. And 200 of those would have been diagnosed in the United States. They were under 1 year of age. They would have been diagnosed as sudden death syndrome or crib death in the United States. 35% had cystic fibrosis and 100% had muscular dystrophy. I mean, we were so excited about that. Now, 6 months after the manufacturer's baby formula, we're talking about Infamil, Similac, those kind of things, started putting selenium in their formulas, the Charlotte Observer, which is the big newspaper in Charlotte, North Carolina, kind of like the New York Times for New York, the Charlotte Observer came out, front page story with big bold letters, just like Third World War started kind of stuff. So we don't know why, but sudden death syndrome has vanished in the state of North Carolina. 3 months later, St. Louis newspapers came out and said, we don't know why, but sudden death syndrome has vanished in the state of Missouri. 3 months later, all the newspapers of all the states came out and said, we don't know why, but the rate of sudden death syndrome has drastically dropped by 85 to 95%. Well, that's because selenium was put into the baby formulas. And now you don't hear about crib death anymore because it's pretty much eliminated because we put the right nutrient, selenium, into the baby formulas. So it's a very, very exciting thing. And of course, the whole Wallach family, including Milan and I and Steve and Michelle and the girls and Jeremiah and all of Youngevity and all the Youngevity associates. And I was so glad that, Dr. Schrauzer, before he died, he knew all of this stuff. And it was such a great thing to know him and see his understanding of selenium come to fruit. Now, here's a little bit more on crib death. It was only 2% of the babies that died of crib death and diagnosed with crib death at autopsy were in bed with their mother when they died, less than 2%. None of them suffocated. When you redid the autopsies, none of them suffocated. When you knew what you were looking for, they all died from hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease, white muscle disease of the heart, muscular dystrophy of the heart. Sudden death syndrome was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease of the heart, a selenium deficiency. And so when we got selenium put in baby formulas, it ended sudden death syndrome. Now, this is not too unusual for the medical profession because you go back for 2,000 years, doctors knew for a fact that plagues and pandemics were caused by evil spirits. They knew that for a fact, and that's why they came up with bleeding by leeches and cutting your veins open and sucking blood out of you to try and lower the rate of evil spirits in your blood. So it's not anything changed. According to Johns Hopkins, very famous medical school, 2016, the number 3 cause of death by simple mistakes in hospitals is medical doctors. Each year they kill, that's the words they use, they kill 251,000 patients in their workplace from simple mistakes. The Center for Disease Control came out and said in 2004, federal government, federal agency, very well respected, that our children will be the first generation Americans that do not live as long as their parents. Our children will be the first generation Americans that do not live as long as their parents. That's the Center for Disease Control said that in 2004. What a horrible indictment against the beliefs of the medical system. Now, here comes, again, the cherry on the buffet. last Friday, there was a reporter asking the head of the health system in the state of California, look, I'm 75 years old. I got all these complications, you know, these pre-existing conditions here, high blood pressure and diabetes and all this kind of stuff, which is associated with increased risk of death from coronavirus. What do I do? And the doctor said, just stay at home. All these are nutritional deficiencies. Instead of saying, hey, increase your nutrients for these diseases that are known to be nutritional deficiencies, are also known to be increased risk of many things, okay? Why would you not supplement with these nutrients, reduce your risk if you already have these diseases? For instance, diabetes is a deficiency of either one or two minerals. You can take either one or both. I like to use both. And you take both of those minerals as part of the 90. People with type 2 diabetes, brittle diabetes for 20 years will go away in 30 days by actual blood tests. Their doctors say, I don't know why, but you don't have diabetes anymore. Okay, well, the same thing is true when it comes to selenium. If everybody were to supplement with the 90 essential nutrients and with extra selenium, I take like 9 selenium capsules a day. In addition to the 90, I take the Healthy Brain and Heart Pack, and I take 9 selenium a day. In addition to the 90 essential nutrients, I stay away from all the bad stuff, including gluten, so I can maximize absorption, which brings me to one more piece, and I'll just take 2 minutes, if I may, on the gluten thing. The Germans they're the 5th leading country in the world when it comes to number of infections with the coronavirus. They're number 5 in the world. Yet their fatality rate is 0.5%. They have the lowest fatality rate in the world. Yet they're the number 5 out of 186 countries that got it. They're number 5 with the numbers of infections, but they have the lowest rate of deaths. Okay. And then when you look at Louisiana, their rate of these pre-existing conditions is 66% high blood pressure. Italy has 76% high blood pressure. Again, Louisiana, when it comes to diabetes, is 43.5%. Italy is 35%. When it comes to hypertrophic cardiomyopathy heart disease, a selenium deficiency, right? It's 22% in Louisiana and 33% in Italy. Now, why would Italy have the highest rate of these diseases, okay, these pre-existing conditions? Why is it that Italy has the highest death rate, the 10% from coronavirus? That's because their source of calories is 99.99% wheat, gluten, pasta. You look at Germany, 99% of their, and I've been doing research on this for weeks, 99% of their source of carbohydrates is potatoes. They do not eat gluten. So if you stay away from gluten, get off of gluten, take your 90 essential nutrients, throw in extra selenium, guess what? We can actually have the rate of deaths from coronavirus go from 10% like it is in Italy down to 0.5% like it is in Germany. And the most exciting thing to me is when a kid gets coronavirus, the death rate, is very low. They don't even get clinical disease. It's sort of like a low common cold. And then when you get in your 50s, suddenly you have to go to the hospital and be on ventilators, but most people will survive. But you get in your 60s and 70s, you're in trouble. The average age of death in the United States and Italy from coronavirus is 80 years of age, okay? And that's because their white blood cells aren't functioning anymore to protect them. Their antibodies aren't functioning anymore to protect them because they have osteoporosis. We've known this for 8,000 years, that osteoporosis is a takeoff from celiac disease, which is due to gluten. We've known that for 8,000 years. It was again repeated by a Roman physician, 250 BC. He came out and said the most common side effect of celiac disease is osteoporosis. Well, osteoporosis, your bone marrow fills up with scar tissue, no more white blood cells, so you can't go after and kill and eat the viruses anymore. So that's my story, and I'm sticking with it, Steve.
Okay, all right. There's a lot of information there. Again, Michelle's going to post a link to the Dr. Wenger Selenium report, so there's a lot of great information in that. You know, one of the reference books I like to use is the dietary reference intakes books dietary reference intakes book. There's a series of them, and this one happens to be on vitamin C, vitamin E, selenium, and carotenoids, and it's published by the Institute of Medicine. Okay, and so this one's copywritten 2000. I'm sure there's newer versions, but it goes into a lot of scientific literature on each of these various nutrients. And so I like to wallow in that reference material at times. But there's a big section in this, and again, it was this version was published in 2000, and you'll see I have a lot of dog ear bookmarks. But there's a big section on Kishan and Kishan province, Kishan disease, and the Kishan references that you're talking about. So it's not just you, it's not just Dr. Milan, it's not, I shouldn't say just, but it's not only you and only Dr. Milan and only Dr. Schrouser that talk about Kishan and Kishan disease being specifically related to and caused by selenium deficiency. It's published in the Institute of Medicine DRI reference book in the section on selenium. And yet you and Dr. Milan actually went to Kishan province in China and did these autopsies, reviewed the pathology, and published a study and a report on your findings. So you didn't just read about it like I'm reading about it. You actually took the initiative to go there and see the results with your own eyes and research this yourself. It's what's called original research. You did the research, and you and Dr. Milan. And so, everybody owes you and Dr. Milan and Dr. Schrouser a great debt of gratitude for that persistence in educating the world really on the benefits and importance of selenium. When you got back, not only did you continue working on educating the world on that, I remember, in the late 70s and 80s and beyond, ever since really, but you giving free lectures on your findings all around the world really, but certainly around the country, and 2020 being in our living room, interviewing you and all of that stuff. But in 2003, it was actually 2002, you and Wellness Lifestyles, which is this company, the name has changed to AL Global, always doing business DBA as longevity, and before that American longevity. But in 2002, you and the company, through Jonathan Emord's office, filed the first selenium health claim petition. And so in 2003, and you can find this on the FDA.gov website, is the letter corresponding with Jonathan Emord informing him on our behalf that they were going to allow qualified health claims for the first time on selenium. And that meant that the world could use those qualified health claims. And so we went where the science was to file those health claims. And that's the Philip Wenger, the Dr. Wenger report on the benefits of selenium and the risk reduction of certain cancers. And so getting the education out there was not really the starting point, but the continuation of helping to educate the world on the importance and the necessity and the essentiality of selenium, for example. And then you and the company filed additional health claims on various other vitamins and essential fatty acids and so forth. And there's a lot of history that we'll get into in future, articles and things and blog posts and interviews maybe on those. But in 2009, this is kind of interesting too, and this was published in nutraingredients.com, which to this day is one of the online magazines for the industry of nutrients and nutrition and the nutrition industry. And but the headline is FDA faces legal challenge over selenium health claims. And so they in 2008, 2009 decided that they would re-review the health claims that you and the company had filed with the FDA that they had authorized. And what their goal, I think, was to actually reverse those health claims and eliminate them. And so you and a coalition of like-minded people, and Jonathan E. Mord really was the tip of the spear in dealing with the court activity, obviously, actually sued the FDA and widened the health claims filed with the FDA. And so additional health claims, instead of reversing the existing health claims, they actually had to authorize and wound up authorizing a wider array of health claims associated specifically with selenium and selenium supplementation and selenium intake.
So we can widen it some more.
Yeah, well, and then obviously you and others, like-minded people and companies, filed the additional comments and science as to the necessity of including it in baby formula, for instance, and now it is a required nutrient within baby formula, any baby formula sold in the United States. And so, again, it's just, you continue to, do these things because obviously of your research and belief and knowledge of the importance of selenium. One of the things I want to talk about also, people are asking me always about epigenetics and what that means. And this whole conversation really is epigenetics. And you're credited with being the godfather and grandfather, I guess, of epigenetics before it even had a term. I think your theory, which became more than a theory, obviously, but your discovery on the first case of naturally occurring cystic fibrosis in a non-human at Yerkes, which was a division of the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. Your back then theory, and you postulated, and it's all in the articles going back to 1978, so it's very documented, that you pinpointed back then that selenium was central to the deficiency, along with vitamin E and riboflavin, I believe, going by memory myself. But you knew then. And so, as you said in this interview, they actually fired you, not because you discovered that. In fact, they first said, it's so interesting because first they rejected your theory, they rejected your finding, then they confirmed your finding, then they embraced your finding, worldwide press release on Yerkes making this discovery. And then when you insisted on getting the information out that it was nutritional as opposed to genetic, they fired you. And so, but since then, obviously the research is continuing. And, I remember specifically you telling me, I think I was like 12 or 13 years old. I specifically remember you telling me that it would take 100 years for science to confirm your back then theory and discovery. And I'd say it didn't take 100 years, and I'd say they're most of the way there. But so, there's still a debate, and I always kind of describe it as a chicken and an egg debate, right? So there's still a debate as to how much is genetic and how much isn't. But that's where epigenetics is, that GUI interface, if you use a technical technology term, where it all comes together. Because you could argue that it's a genetic outcome, but you can argue that it's a nutritional deficiency and a nutritional inducement, an environmental aspect. But that's where epigenetics comes together. That's my definition of epigenetics. You're the grandfather of epigenetics. So why don't you tell us your understanding in a nutshell of epigenetics and how that all comes together?
Well, the reason why I'm considered one of the fathers or godfathers of epigenetics is when I first came back from Africa to work on this big 10-year project, the Center for the Biology of Natural Systems, and did my 20,000 autopsies. Perkins he picked me up at the airport, and I didn't even have my jacket off. It was April of 1967, coming back from Africa. And he gave me 2 pieces of paper, and he said, "Okay, Wallach, here's what the NIH wants you to study, all this pollution stuff, because you wrote the first paper on a mass die-off in America for pollution. So you're directed by them to use the money to study pollution, what animals in the zoos have the same sensitivity to pollutions that damage or kill humans. And then here's my piece of paper. I want you to do a few things for me, and I want to know why all the bears in all the zoos are dying of liver cancer. I mean, we're talking about every species of bears and every zoo in the world was dying of liver cancer." And he said, all the geneticists are saying it's genetic. I said, uh-oh, I'm in trouble again before I even get my coat off here. Okay, they believe it's genetic. It turns out, to make a long story short, liver cancer is caused by a toxin called aflatoxin, which is a byproduct of growth of a bread mold called aspergillus. It's that kind of blue-green mold on old bread. And so I already knew that. So before I had my coat off, I said, okay, that's not true. It's not a genetic disease. I mean, we're talking polar bears, black bears, grizzly bears, Kodiak bears, sun bears. Oh yeah, all the different species of bears are dying of liver cancer. Well, that tells you right away that's not a genetic thing. Okay, there's something else wrong here. Take me to where you store the food for the bears, because St. Louis has all these gunite caves and beautiful setup for bears. Every species of bears is one of the biggest bear populations in America, St. Louis Zoo. So he takes me to this barn, and they have all this old bread from the thrift stores in there. And I said, shut off the lights. And we had stopped at the zoo animal hospital and picked up a black light, which is a UV light. I said, turn off the lights, turn off the lights. And I shined the UV light, turned it on, and shined it on to all this old bread. And all the old bread glowed like a green go light at a stoplight at an intersection. He said, what's that? Why did that glow like that? I said, well, that is aflatoxin. That's the toxin that causes liver cancer. It's a byproduct of bread mold. And how much of it? Well, it's a big bear. It's 1,000 pounds. We couldn't afford to give him meat and eggs and stuff like that. So we'd give him 5 loaves of bread for all the calories and a couple of eggs or maybe a fish once in a while. And that way we could afford to have them. He said, okay, well, that's your problem. You got to turn them on to dog food instead of old bread. And so we put them on dog food, and all the bears in the world stopped having liver cancer. That's epigenetics, okay, instead of genetics, as the doctors thought it was genetic in all these bears. Also, I was able to get 2 little ducks. These were little mallard ducks, worth $3 a piece. And it was spring when I got there. It was April of 1967, and they're building a nest out in the middle of the zoo. And I said, which one of all these ducks are the oldest ones? Well, that pair over there, they've been coming here every year for 10 years, okay? Any of their babies born with any defects? No. Okay, what I want you to do is you steal all their eggs out of their nests, except one egg, put black marks on it with a marker, and then put them in the freezer. And they'll lay some more eggs, take them out, leave that one with black marks in the nest, and put them in the freezer. When you get 100 eggs, call me. You got 100 fertile eggs from that pair of ducks in 6 weeks, divide them into 4 groups of 25 each, and gave each group a different diet. Okay? And to make a long story short, group number 4 that had the perfect diet was 5 times bigger than group number 1, which just had like lettuce as their diet. 5 times bigger, but yet they had the same genetics, okay? And everything in between in the other 2 groups. And that got published in scientific journals. It was part of the audio cassette tape, Dead Doctors Don't Lie, and the book, Dead Doctors Don't Lie. And the book, of course, Epigenetics is in there. It's in the book, Rare Earth Bin Cures, all the pictures of these 4 different groups in the story. And it turns out that when people say, we've got 5 generations of diabetes in our family. Well, do they all live in the same area? Oh yeah, we all live in the same county. I mean, that's been our home forever. But we have 5 generations with type 2 diabetes. Well, it's a mineral deficiency. And so what do you guys eat? Well, we're of Italian background. We have pizza for lunch. We have spaghetti for dinner. We have pancakes for breakfast. Our snacks are cookies and muffins, and we put croutons on our salad. Well, everything you eat is gluten here, and you can't absorb the nutrients, even if you were supplementing, and that's why everybody's got diabetes. You have 5 generations of diabetes because you're eating gluten and you cannot absorb the nutrients, even if you're supplementing, and that's why you have 5 generations of diabetes. It's not a genetic thing, it's an epigenetic thing, okay? And if you look up the prefix epi, it sort of means sort of around the main word, okay? And so epigenetics means this is information from around genetics, has nothing to do with genetics, but it was interpreted as genetics because they had 5 generations of the same family in the same county with the same disease. And they said, well, that's a genetic thing because you got 5 generations. No, it's simple epigenetics. And you started supplementing everybody. And I don't care if they've had diabetes for 50 years, it goes away because it's a simple mineral deficiency. But the key factor is you got to get them off of gluten so their intestines will heal enough so they can absorb the minerals.
Well, you have, and people like Dr. Milan and Dr. Schrauzer, but you specifically have not only been trained going back to, you talked about being a graduate student and
Yes.
comparative pathology and all of that. So, I mean, you were trained to compare human populations and disease and epidemiology, basically, within populations of people and compare that to animals. And that's ultimately what led to that discovery in cystic fibrosis in an animal. Is it was thought only to be a human only disease when it actually wasn't. It's just nobody was aware that it was even possible.
Something in there, Steve. That's a good point. You have to appreciate that when a doctor or a PhD does a study on a new disease, like the coronavirus maybe, or on diabetes, or on a new pharmaceutical to treat a disease, they'll use 100 white rats. My studies were on 454 species of animals and humans. And so that's why my studies were so unique, that nobody has ever even come close to ever doing that again. We're talking 454 species of zoo animals from that study that I had done autopsies on. And we're talking 20,000 autopsies, 17,000 some change on those 454 species of animals and 3,000 humans. Book Epicgenetics itself represents autopsies on 8,000 humans, okay? And so this is a collection of information that has never been accumulated by any other pathologist. I mean, even Harvard Medical School, other than my work, they don't have anything like that in there. I'm sure they have my stuff in their library, but other than my work in their library, there's nobody has come close to doing those kind of things. So I have a different view. I have a different understanding. I'm certainly not smarter than anybody else. I'm just a dumb farm boy from Missouri, but I do have exposure to things, okay, including autopsies of free-ranging animals in Africa, the various antelope. We would actually kill 5 different species of antelope and buffalo and everything because they were eating the same grasses that the white rhino was and competing for food with a rare endangered species. So we would kill the competition and give the carcasses to the villages so they could have meat and everything like that. But I would do autopsies on them and look for birth defects and we had different diseases in those animals based on what game reserve they came from, because the nutrients in the soil were different in the different game reserves. So it was all kind of interesting, even in the free ranging animals.
Well, I always tell people too that, from your perspective, and veterinarians in general are taught such a different set of criteria for diagnostics, because your patients as a veterinarian, now obviously you're a physician for humans as well now, but the diagnostics is, when you're being trained to be a veterinarian, are so different, because not only are you dealing with 454 different species, if you're a veterinarian like yourself that didn't specialize in horses, let's say, or something like that. And so you're dealing with different, creatures, but also none of them can tell you really what's wrong with them unless it's an obvious wound, right? So from a diagnostic standpoint, you have to be extremely observational and take it to the extreme of looking at diets and environments and things like that. Whereas with medical doctors, they tend to talk to their patient and really kind of interact with a very specific set of symptoms that they don't really dig too much deeper. And then there's always the issue of limited time and on to the next patient and all of that stuff. And so, as you've always said, if you're looking for advice on longevity, a medical doctor is not the best place to find information on longevity. Although there have been various medical doctors that have shared your philosophies and views, including Dr. Milan and Dr. Dubois, but also Robert McGarrison, who was the King of England's personal physician, who witnessed this sort of long-lived cultures by immersing himself in the population of the Huns, I believe, and really observing personally how they lived and how they then lived long.
Well, I want to throw one more piece in here, and it's current right now. The Roman Empire was devastated and destroyed by malaria. That's what actually wiped out the Roman Empire. It wasn't any other armies. It was an army of blood parasites. They knew about the fevers back then, but they didn't know it was a parasite. And it wasn't until the 1870s that a English medical student in India they had a microscope and he was looking at blood cells of people who had this fever, and he saw this little black dot in the red blood cells, and he dug it out and saw that it was a parasite, and they traced it back to mosquitoes because he started doing autopsies on mosquitoes and finding the parasite in the mosquito's stomach and their salivary glands and everything. And this fever had been around for thousands of years, okay? But it wasn't until 400 years ago when they came up with cinchona, a bark, okay, which is a tree from South America, that they could take that cinchona bark and give it to somebody who had this fever. They didn't even know that it had a parasite, but they took it for a fever and it would go away. Okay. Well, when this guy discovered it was a parasite, they started marketing this cinchona bark extract, which is called quinine, and they could actually kill it in 3 days. They could kill that parasite and their fever would go away. But only rich people could afford the quinine. So the masses of people living out in the boonies, they would still die by the thousands, maybe by the millions of malaria every year. It wasn't until the 1920s, 400 years later, that a chemist came out with DDT and started spraying the swamps and killing the mosquitoes, which was transferring the malaria from one person to the next, that they wiped out malaria. Well, the same thing is true here with this coronavirus. I hope and pray that they find a drug and a pharmaceutical that will kill the virus. I hope and pray that they find a vaccination that will protect people. But it's not going to be 2 years. It's going to be 2 years before they get a vaccination that's going to be working and all that kind of stuff and begin to protect people. So in the meantime, if we give people all their 90 essential nutrients, okay, get rid of the gluten out of their diet to maximize absorption so that they can give their bone marrow what it needs to make white blood cells, because your bone marrow is your best friend when it comes to your immune system. Your bone marrow makes white blood cells, okay? And your white blood cells then attack and eat and kill the virus. You have stem cells in your bone marrow that also make antibodies which attack and kill the virus. But the reason why the average age of people at death in the top, well, I guess it's all the countries with the coronavirus, is 80, and it's just kind of like minor cold symptoms in kids, is because by the time you're 80 years old and you've been eating gluten all your life, you don't have any bone marrow left to make antibodies or white blood cells. And so that's why you die from coronavirus when you're 80, because you don't have any protection anymore. When you're a kid, you have all this protection. Your bone marrow is healthy. It's making white blood cells and antibodies. So I urge people to kind of look at this differently than everybody else. Get off of gluten. Do like the Germans do. Eat nothing but rice and potatoes. And that's why they have only 0.5% death rate, where the Italians, the Germans have the lowest death rate because they're eating potatoes and rice, whereas the Italians have the highest rate of death, 10%, because their whole diet is pasta, gluten, damages the intestine, cannot absorb the nutrients, even if you're supplementing. So that's why they have the highest death rate.
All right. Well, thank you for all of that great information. I'm consuming my comfort food, Be the Change coffee. It's absolutely guaranteed to be gluten-free and certified organic, so none of the bad stuff. So anyway, we'll pick one of these up again in the future. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Everybody stay well.